The year is 50 BC. Gaul is entirely occupied by the Romans. Well, not entirely. One small village of indomitable Gauls still holds out against the invaders. And life is not easy for the Roman legionaries who garrison the fortified camps of Totorum, Aquarium, Laudanum, and Compendium.
This is the idea behind the Asterix comics. These comics are known around almost the whole world. Saddeningly, for someone who grew up in America, I did not know of Asterix until around the point I was in college. The first thing I learned about this series was the ambitious GBA game, a port of the console game released around the same time. Now, Asterix has video games made based on the series going all the way back to the Atari 2600. In fact, the earliest Asterix game is actually a reskin of a Taz the Tasmanian Devil video game. I just thought I'd add that because it's an interesting factoid. Now, much like the series in general, not many of these games have been released outside of Europe or PAL territories. Luckily, a lot of the games are on systems that are region-free, but even then, the games have many ups and downs in quality. Outside of the games I will be talking about today, I do recommend the Asterix arcade game by Konami, as it is a fun Konami beat-em-up based on the franchise, akin to the Simpsons arcade game or the Turtles in Time game. Now, as for the two games I will be reviewing, they're 3D platformer beat-em-ups. You play as either Asterix or his friend Obelix, and try and beat up as many Roman legionnaires and soldiers as possible. Now, for the uninitiated, I'll let my good Mad Doctor friend explain.
Right, so Asterix is a short mustachioed character. With the help of a magic potion, he has the strength of, well, a god. He may be the smartest of the Gauls in the village, outside of the druid that supplies the village with said potion. That druid, depending on the translation you're reading, is either called Getafix or Panoramix, or even Vitamix. With his knowledge, he has created a magic potion that gives anyone or anything that drinks it superhuman strength, and this has greatly helped the village on many an occasion. There is also Asterix's large friend, Obelix. He is not as bright as the other two, but he is a lovable oaf that easily is the strongest person in the entire village. As a baby, he had fallen into the cauldron of magic potion, and is permanently strong because of it. Unfortunately, this means that Getafix refuses to give him any of the potion, seemingly because either it wouldn't have an effect, or it would make him an uncontrollable beast. He also does love his food, but don't call him fat, unless you want to be launched through the moon. And last but not least is Obelix's little dog, Dogmatix, a cute little white dog. He has accompanied Asterix and Obelix on their many adventures. He's even helped out on many occasions where they have needed it the most.
Thanks, Doc. Hopefully with that, it should be a bit easier to get through this video with the few people who don't know of the series. Now, the game itself begins with Asterix and Obelix hunting wild boar for the day. As they are about to head back to the village, Dogmatix notices something is wrong and rushes back. Asterix and Obelix, noticing he's missing, go out to find him, only for Asterix to notice that the village is on fire. Once rushing over, he sees that the villagers are missing. The only one here is a Gaul spy that has defected from Caesar's command. He tells Asterix that Caesar's men have taken the villagers and scattered them all across his kingdom. A little side note, but I want to bring this up. Hilariously enough, the Asterix wiki lists this guy as Sam Schiffer, who is the spy from Asterix and Obelix XXL 2. I don't think this guy ever has a name, so it would kinda be funny if they are supposed to be the same character. Anyway, outside of when we save some of Asterix's village, there's not really much of a story in this game. The game can boil down to go to Normandy, punch some Romans, go to Greece, punch some more Romans, rinse and repeat until you get to Caesar. That's not entirely a bad thing, though. Mario games have had very basic, bare bones plots since the 80s. And as this is one of the first games based on Asterix to be in 3D, it makes sense why it has a simpler story. And granted, I'm also skimming through it mostly because I'm reviewing 2 game. Well, if the story is simplistic, then how is the gameplay? Honestly, it's pretty fun, and it makes sense for the characters. Like I mentioned, they are beat-em-ups with 3D platformer elements. While the platforming isn't the main focus, it does complement these characters. Instead of coins, you collect the helmets of Roman soldiers, and instead of stars, you have golden laurels, though I haven't really found much reason to collect the laurels outside of completionist mentality. Okay, so this is future glitch here after recording this and during editing. So when I was writing this, I didn't know what the laurels did. I later found out that collecting all of the golden laurels, at least in this first game, unlocks alternate costumes for both Asterix and Obelix. Again, they're mostly optional, but they do at least add something. I want to make sure I brought that up so people didn't comment saying, oh, the laurels do this. I wrote that before I had collected all of them in a stage. And even then, collecting all the laurels in one stage gets you one costume. Collecting all the laurels for every stage gets you all of them. I have not 100% of this game, so I don't know if there's a full completion bonus. I just know that that's something that is in the game. Anyway, back to past glitch. Outside of this, there are obstacle course areas that you have to get past, but nothing that the target audience for this game, which would be around, I want to say 10 years old, would have trouble handling. Though there are a few of these sections where you have to bring a torch somewhere to light a basin before you can progress. And these sections did give me some trouble. Is less that you have a timer on the torches, which granted you do, and more the obstacles in the way, including wind that'll blow the torches out and enemies that'll knock you into the water. Minor annoyances at best, but they did give me a handful of trouble on the occasions that I had to get through them. Eventually, after rescuing all of the villagers, we head to Rome to free the chief and stop Caesar once and for all. At the very least until the next adventure where they have to defeat Caesar again. Once we finally defeat him, we save our friends and return back to the village to have the typical feast that ends off most Asterix adventures. And I love that they just have the giant carved head of Caesar in their village as a trophy. That is kind of funny. Yes, I did kind of skim through the plot, but again, I'm reviewing 2 games here, and there's not really much of a story outside of go save the villagers. And while I haven't named the villagers, I will bring up one of the major plot points is every time you rescue a villager, you get a larger piece of a map that Caesar has for his entire kingdom that he has conquered. For every villager you save, or group of villagers in some cases, they will give you more and more of this map. And it at least leads you to the next area. minor stuff, but I did want to bring it up, mostly so people don't comment saying, oh, you forgot about this part of the plot. Before I move on to the second game, I want to bring up the Game Boy Advance version of XXL. This is how I first learned about Asterix and is an incredibly ambitious and impressive port. The Game Boy Advance is on par with a Super Nintendo in terms of games, at least how I've always seen it, but this is a full 3D platformer, much like the console versions. To be fair, I didn't play much of this version for this review, but I do recommend trying this version. It is incredibly impressive, and while it's not amazing, the fact that it is a full 3D platformer with, as far as I can tell, the entire game, it is honestly amazing that this was on the Game Boy Advance. And even more impressive, that it was made by 2 people, which for a game in 2003, 2004, is even more impressive to me. Anyway, with that being said, let's move on to XXL 2. Released 2 years after the first, XXL 2 has very similar beats. The gameplay for one is almost exactly the same, with one of the few differences being in the fact that the Roman soldiers you fight take the appearance of many video game characters. You have soldiers based on Sonic, Ryu from Street Fighter, Mario, and even Pac-Man. Hell, later in the game you fight soldiers based on Rayman, and one of the main villains in this game is a parody of Lara Croft from the early Tomb Raider games, and not the 2013 reboot. In fact, the original version of this game's box art was done in a style of GTA, similar to, I want to say, Vice City or San Andreas. It shows many of the video game references that this game has. Now, why are there all these video game references? Funnily enough, it goes down to Caesar's latest plan to conquer the Gauls. He has his men create a whole theme park called Las Vegum, an obvious parody of Las Vegas. And a lot of the places are video game related. Hell, an entire area in this game is named the WCW as a reference to the same wrestling federation from the 90s. Honestly, I just find that funny. Although, it is a little more annoying that every time I've tried to break into the WCW, there's a giant wall of fire blocking my way. Although, chances are if I was in there, it'd go something a little like this.
Stop the chairs! Do not throw chairs into the ring!
Now, Asterix doesn't really have a reason to go after Caesar because, honestly, I said this is a plan to conquer the Gauls, but he's not really actually attacking them. Granted, he does plan on conquering them. That plan involves him kidnapping all of the druids in the kingdom so that he can have them make potions to make his soldiers stronger so he can conquer more kingdoms. Which, granted, is something he's done in many Asterix stories. But the main part of this is Getafix apparently betrayed the other druids and is working for Caesar. A Roman spy going by Sam Schiffer, who mentioned earlier, and is a clear parody of Sam Fisher from Splinter Cell, tells Asterix and Obelix and Vital Statistics, the village chief, what happened. Asterix obviously doesn't believe that Getafix would betray his fellow druids or even the village that he has protected all of these years. So he decides to go to Las Vegas to figure out what's going on. Much like with the first game, I don't really have much to say when it comes to the plot of this game because While it is bigger than the last game, there's not really much for me to say. You go to all of these different places of Las Vegas trying to figure out whether or not Getafix actually betrayed the Gauls. But again, much like how the first game didn't really have a whole lot of story, this one you're mostly just going from place to place trying to solve this mystery. And honestly, it's fairly obvious that it's not the real Getafix. You eventually find out that the Getafix that betrayed the Druids is a Roman centurion that goes by Larry Kraft, the Laura Croft parody I mentioned earlier. He had disguised himself to trick the Druids with the real Getafix, presumably getting kidnapped by the Romans sometime off-screen before the events of the game. And honestly, despite the fact that there are plenty of cutscenes and a bigger story than the first game, there's not really much for me to honestly talk about, which is one of the reasons why I kinda skimmed over both plots. That's not to say that the stories are bad, it's just they're simplistic. Makes me kind of fear when I ever do a Mario game because it's probably going to be shorter than a lot of people would most likely expect. Now, like I had mentioned earlier, XXL2 is full of references to pop culture and especially video games of the time. I had mentioned one of the stages is named after the WCW, and the enemies that are based on classic video game characters. Funnily enough, America didn't actually get this game. We did get XXL1 as Kick Buttix on the PlayStation 2, which, for everyone curious, that's the reason for the title. But we never got this sequel until 2018 with the remaster. I'm not entirely surprised that the remaster happened because a lot of companies were making remasters at the same time, like THQ Nordic with SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom, and the people who made the original Ty games remastering Ty the Tasmanian Devil for modern systems. It honestly made a bit of sense. Though it is interesting to me that they remastered the second game first. They did later remaster XXL1, which is the version that I played for this review, but the fact that they went with the second game and then remastered one is a little interesting. Also, in America, the game was later renamed as Royal Rumble in Las Vegas, with the actual Asterix title working more as a subtitle, which, as somebody who is a fan of this series in general, it's kind of upsetting that this game is kind of swept under the rug. Let me finish the story before I move on to that point, though. After freeing all of the druids, including eventually getting to Getafix, we get to Caesar and the last of his men, which leads to both a final fight with the boss that you've been fighting against this entire game, and even a battle against multiple Caesar clones, as if you're Neo fighting Agent Smith, which funnily leads to a line where Caesar refers to Asterix as Mr. Anderson. They knew what they were doing. Eventually, after defeating him, Asterix forces Caesar to call his men off from conquering America, I think they call it. And of course, this leads to the typical Asterix ending feast. I did skim over the plots of both games, and I do apologize, but there's not really much for me to say when, again, these plots are fairly simple. That's not to say they're bad, I just don't have much to say. That, and I am trying to get these reviews out at a typically regular basis. I'm sure a lot of people have noticed that this one's probably a bit later than I intended. Usually I like getting reviews out at least a week after the last one, but this one took a bit longer for me to write, partially because I'm reviewing 2 games at once. Now, that being said, I do want to bring up the PlayStation Portable and DS versions of XXL 2. Much like the Game Boy Advance version of XXL 1, there's not really much that I'm gonna say because I didn't really play with these a whole lot. That being said, the PlayStation Portable version is fairly close to the main game, with it adding multiplayer modes. The DS version, strangely, is a 2D platformer, and it is a bit disappointing when the GBA game was a 3D platformer and this isn't. And I find it interesting that they went this route because the DS could have handled this 3D platformer approach, but didn't. I also want to mention XXL 2 does have certain gameplay changes. Where the first game you can only switch between Asterix and Obelix in certain sections, here, with just a simple button press, you can switch between them at any given time. And I like that better. Now, you can even upgrade Asterix and Obelix throughout the game, as well as get other unlockables. Mostly just collectibles for the sake of collectibles, but they are nice. Strangely enough, one of the collectibles in the original game was cut out of this remaster, which was the cutscenes. I don't know why they would cut that out of a remaster, but the rest of the game is, for the most part, the exact same, from what I was able to notice. Now, one of the biggest things that saddens me about Asterix not being as well known in America is I've seen this remaster, at least for the second game, going for bargain bin numbers at places like GameStop. And while it's not an amazing game, I feel it deserves a lot more love than what it's getting. I'm not saying these are big AAA platformers, but it really does sadden me because I miss the 2000s era of 3D platformers. Yeah, not all of them were good, but we had stuff that we don't really see as much today. What I would refer to as the B or C tier platformers. The most recent games I can think of that fit that category are Clive and Wrench and the recent KO the Kangaroo game, which saddens me even more seeing KO the Kangaroo get put on lists like worst games of 2020, I want to say, when honestly, the game's not bad. It's just, I guess people's expectations for some of these games are higher than what they probably should be. They're expecting something on par with Mario, and honestly, a lot of 3D platformers from the mid-2000s weren't Mario levels of amazing. I don't want every platformer to be mediocre and rushed out, but maybe once in a while, give a try to some of those lesser 3D platformers that don't look as grand as Mario, or hell, even Sonic. I think with that little rant, you guys probably already know how I feel about these games. Granted, I am a fan of Asterix, but I don't feel like being a fan will make your experience much better. I definitely recommend people try these games, as they're just fun 3D platformers in general. Hell, they go on sale a lot of times on every platformer. So maybe if you're in a GameStop or whatever version of GameStop you have in other countries and see a copy in a bargain bin, I'd say give it a try. At worst, you wasted $5, maybe. And for the people who know of Asterix from other countries in America, I'm sorry if I made a couple mistakes with this review. Honestly, take into account how limited my research in Asterix is. I do own a lot of the comics and even some of the movies, but my information could easily be inaccurate. And I will say this. I recommend if you want to try Asterix games, try XXL2 first. Yes, it is the sequel, but honestly, it's the better of the two games. And it's a good, cheesy fun at the end of the day. Yeah, a lot of the references are from the mid-2000s, but take into account the original game came out in 2006. Now, as for me, I have a few other games planned. Not a whole lot, but hopefully stuff that'll fill the next 2 months. That being said, I am going to be taking a nice vacation in October. I got a nice invite to a fancy mansion in Spain. Strangely enough, it does require me to be in costume, so I'll make sure I'm ready for that. And don't worry, vacation or not, I will have a few reviews planned for the month of October. That being said, I guess I'll see you guys then. Oh, and as for Leo and Pixel, I didn't have them in this video because, well, I didn't really have a good place to put them. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time.